And in a special light sport aircraft, it is up to the factory, the manufacturer of that aircraft, to actually determine whether or not you should stick with the 50-50 mix of conventional coolant and water, or you have to go over to the Evans. If you're using conventional coolant and you happen to have a small leak or find that you need to add some coolant on a trip, it's a lot easier to find conventional coolant, or even to top off with a little bit of distilled water in a pinch to get you home. Evans, if you're using Evans, you must completely purge the system of all water and all conventional coolant before you add the Evans. And once you've switched to Evans, you can absolutely not add any water to that system. So, you can only top with Evans.
Some of the advantages to Evans are that the boiling temperature, for instance, is very, very high on Evans. It's in excess of 350 degrees Fahrenheit. And since your temperature limits on the 80 horse is 300 degrees Fahrenheit and the 100 horse is at 275 degrees Fahrenheit, you're never going to see the boiling temperature of the Evans coolant.
Right.
And in a case for perhaps a Sea Ray or a trike or some other pusher configuration airplane, where when you're taxiing and you might see high temperatures when you're taxiing around, that could be an advantage.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely, because if you've got a pusher configuration, and especially something like a Sea Ray where you might have to taxi downwind on the water, you could have almost no air moving over the radiator, and that's a case where you could overheat and perhaps temporarily get close to 300 degrees, and as long as you don't exceed that 300 degrees, you're probably not going to hurt the cylinder head. But if you have conventional coolant, you're going to boil it all out, because conventional coolant, even with the 1.2 bar pressure cap, which we have now, that will boil at about 248 degrees Fahrenheit. So you reach that temperature, boom, you've boiled all the coolant off. Now you've got to shut the engine down and let it cool and put coolant in, and you might have ruined the heads. Remember, if you have a special light sport, all these things are going to be determined by the manufacturer. They should have done the testing and figured all this out ahead of time. And if you want to switch coolants or anything on the airplane, really, you have to have written approval from the airframe manufacturer before you can do that. If you are using conventional coolant, you do want to use distilled water, not tap water. As we know, tap water has minerals in it typically. It can have chlorine in it, and it can cause a lot of corrosion within the system. So go ahead and spend the extra $1. Go to the local grocery store and buy a gallon of distilled water when you mix up your coolant. We have been using DexCool, having good results with that. If you're using conventional coolant.
A couple of the advantages of the water base is that water has a very, very high thermal density. So that means it's going to hold the temperature in your engine more stable than anything else is going to hold the temperature. But you do need to make sure that you're using a DexCool coolant with that water.
If you bought a European light sport aircraft that's come from Europe, they're usually factory test flown.
Correct.
They have coolant in them. You need to use a similar type of coolant. We think some of the modern coolants that you can buy in the automotive store that say guaranteed to mix with any type of coolant, I would use that type of a coolant if I had to top off that system. And the other thing is, we've seen with some of the airplanes, like the Tacnams, for example, they specify 80% coolant, 20% water, which the European coolants tend to be of a different consistency, and so you do use less water. If you were to do that with one of the U.S. Coolants, that would be a big problem, because you're going to have gelling within the system. You don't want to use more than the maximum ratio recommended by the manufacturer. Typically 50-50 is the norm, and that works well. I think with DexCool, the maximum would be 66% coolant, and that's if you live in northern Alaska and you want the absolute maximum anti-freeze protection. But for most people, 50-50 is going to work.
Another advantage that the water-based systems have is that they will actually run your engine at a slightly lower temperature. If you switch from a water-based coolant to Evans, then you will get about a 10 to 20 degree Fahrenheit change in temperature. It will rise because the Evans just doesn't carry the heat quite as well, and it's more viscous, so it doesn't flow as rapidly through the system.